Good afternoon, everyone. So it's good to see you again here in this Plenary Session II. So I'm Elan Satriawan, will serve as a chair in the Plenary Session II, where we will discuss the topic related with poverty, its measurement, and its implication on research agenda and policy formulation in Indonesia. To discuss the topic, we are honored this afternoon that the two prominent figures in the field are here with us. So as the first speaker, I know that she might not need introduction, but as a part of the official protocol, let me just give you some brief bio about her. So Professor Sabina Alkire from Oxford University is the director of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. She is also the associate professor of development studies in the Oxford Department of International Development at the University of Oxford, where from 2015 to 2016, she was also Oliver T. Carr Professor of International Affairs and Professor of Economics at George Washington University. Previously, she worked at the Global Equity Initiative at Harvard University, the Human Security Commission, and World Bank Poverty and Culture Learning and Research Initiative. But I think you may heard about her because together with Professor James Foster, Professor Alkire famously developed the Alkire-Foster method for measuring multidimensional poverty, something that I think many countries now implement it, and many of you actually learn about it. So I'd like to present Professor Alkire, but I think we might heard from the organizer a little bit about her. I think without further ado, 20 minutes for Professor Alkire to present the topics. Time is yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you. I'm very much looking forward to our discussion. And I prepared 25 minutes, so I do apologize. I will try to get through it in 20. The topic of this overall conference is a focus on human capital. And today, what I would like to do is illustrate some techniques for linking individual human capital indicators and multidimensional poverty or well-being measures, and show what the value added of making those linkages can be in terms of having in view a wider horizon of the lived deprivations or attainments that are experienced by people with particular human capital conditions. So I begin just by reminding us that multidimensional measures look at the joint distribution of deprivations. That is, they count or they sum up the different deprivations that people are experiencing at the same time. And so that helps to give an overview of the clustered deprivations. It might be comorbidities in the context of COVID. It might be well-being attainments in the context of a well-being measure. But the technique is to try to bring under one fold, that is for each household or person, a profile of their achievements and deprivations. And so classically, a multidimensional poverty measure would identify a set of dimensions and indicators, and then identify each person or household as deprived or non-deprived in a binary way across each of the indicators. The indicators are weighted and summed into a deprivation score, which shows the percentage of weighted indicators in which that person is deprived. If their deprivation score meets or exceeds a poverty cutoff, they are identified as multidimensionally poor. And then a very simple measure adjusts the incidence, the headcount ratio, by the average intensity of poverty among the poor, and has a number of strong axiomatic properties. But what does this measurement approach have to do with indicators of human capital? We observe that usually multidimensional poverty measures identify who is poor at the level of the household. This recognizes caring and sharing within the household. It recognizes that households are the most common object of targeting for government activities. And it is feasible, given most multi-topic household surveys are conducted at the household level. But there is also a large literature advocating more of a focus on individual deprivations and individual atmospheres or profiles of deprivation. And the advantage of that is it can provide gendered or age-specific information. It might illuminate intra-household inequalities. So here, building on work we have done with Rizwan Al-Haq and Abdul Alim, we will illustrate how there are techniques not to choose between these two approaches, but to bring them together into a consistent analytical framework. So in the presentation, I will suggest that researchers in Indonesia and ourselves undertake linked analyses where we analyze individual deprivations, for example, in human capital, within the context of a household MPI in which these deprivations are also indicators. And we recommend that this become a standard component of the information platform that accompanies multidimensional poverty indices, or MPIs, both in academic and in policy work. And to do that, I'll introduce a new term, which are individual deprivations. Individual deprivations use data on individual members of the household, either all of them or most often a subset of household members, to assess deprivations. And what we are going to do in this paper is see how those individual deprivations can be further analyzed after they are used in a household MPI. But I would like to start with an invitation, particularly to the researchers in this call. A number of the analyses which I here propose are not undertaken widely, and in some cases not undertaken at all. And so the methodology is well worked out, but there is an invitation for empirical papers to understand and to apply these techniques with data for Indonesia. So what do? We recognize that national MPIs built at the household level use indicators of individual deprivation. And so we will look at those individual indicators and restrict the sample to the eligible populations who have data on that particular indicator. And then we will go back to the microdata and analyze it by gender, by poverty status, by intra-household patterns, and by deprivations that cluster for that particular group of people. And at the moment, we have identified 6 relationships that might be of most interest. But when you understand this approach to working with linked household and individual data, you might want to expand this and look at other relationships. And there are certainly many that can be considered. So How does this relate to human capital? Human capital has many definitions, and it also has limitations. As Amartya Sen mentions, human capital focuses on the instrumental value of things like health and education and work, on their ability to drive economic growth. But health has an intrinsic value, the ability to be healthy, even if you are retired. Education, the ability to recite a poem, might have a value that does not drive economic growth. And having a meaningful job, which you feel can serve the society and can make good use of your talents, that aspect of meaningfulness of work is not the same as the wage. But I will focus on variables which often reflect human capital, because these variables are also what I earlier defined as individual deprivations. They have to do with educational outcomes, with health or nutrition outcomes, with work status. And these human capital indicators are usually included in official national multidimensional poverty statistics. But when they are included, and this is important, they are not included at the individual level. Rather, all eligible persons in a household provide information, and there is some intra-household aggregation of that information. For example, there might be 3 children of school-aged. And the question is any child not attending school? So you look at all 3 children and 2 are in school, but 1 is not. So by the definition that you are deprived of any school-aged child is out of school, then you are deprived in schooling. But in another household, it might be 2 out of the 3 children who are out of school, or they might be a difference in gender or in age. So we will want to unpack that information in a moment. And similarly, in the case of nutrition, you might be deprived if no member of any member of your household is undernourished. And so you might have 6 household members with anthropometric data. And then you look at all of them and you are coded, your household is coded as deprived in nutrition if any of the members is stunted or underweight. So the normal way of using individual deprivations in the MPI loses information in order to obtain a household measure. But these individual insights can be clicked open. And that is a way of melding, combining multidimensional poverty or well-being and human capital analyses. So there are 4 different approaches to bringing them together. One is to include indicators on education, health, or work in the Multidimensional Poverty Index. The second is to disaggregate that MPI by something like occupation or level of education, highest level of education in the household. You could also analyze how the human capital deprivations cluster. For example, what proportion of people who have not completed secondary school are also deprived in a health indicator, or are also unemployed or underemployed or informally employed. So you can look at different clusters of deprivations. And the last is to probe the individual characteristics of the indicators, but also at the same time to see their deprivations in housing, in electricity, in access to health insurance at the family level, or to health care. So other household level achievements or deprivations. All of this requires careful work and attention to the sample design, which I will not cover in this presentation, as I focus now on the methodologies. So first, including human capital indicators in multidimensional poverty indices. Now there are many MPIs, so these slides have some countries as the columns, and the ticked boxes are whether that country's official permanent multidimensional poverty statistic includes a particular indicator. The top line is school attendance, and the second line is years of schooling. And you can see that most national multidimensional poverty measures include those, and other education indicators like school lag or preschool might also be included. Educational quality as well. Coming to health, most MPIs include a dimension on health, often with nutrition or access to health services or even health insurance as the indicators. And coming to employment, all Latin American MPIs, except for Mexico, include employment indicators in their official MPI. Most often, this might be unemployment or underemployment, but it also includes informal work, child labor, and youth who are not in education, employment, or training. And it also, in some countries, includes wage or dependency ratio. The second approach is simply to disaggregate, now not by something like rural urban areas, but disaggregate by characteristics of human capital. For example, what is the level of MPI of people who have and have not completed secondary school or school attendance for children? And you can see interesting associations between these deprivations and MPI levels, but they won't be perfect associations. And that's quite interesting. For example, across South Asia, 88% of children who were not attending school were multidimensionally poor, but only 65% of undernourished children lived in MPI poor households. And naturally, taking the indicators individually, one can also recover information, for example, on gender. In Afghanistan, 16.1% of people aged 17 to 24 were not in education, employment, or training. But that 16% was an average, because for boys, it was 11.2%, and for girls, it was 21.0%. So it can uncover gender disparities in an elementary way. And we can also go further. I'll give examples here just as an illustration for children, but of course it can also be illustrated for adults and also for additional dimensions or indicators like unemployment. But this is the global MPI, and it's covered for South Asia. And I won't go into all of the notation, but only to say that we have to consider the individuals who have data on each of the individual deprivations, and we analyze them as a group, just like I said, of the children aged 17 to 24 in Afghanistan. Those are the eligible individuals. And we do an analysis of them by their poverty status, by their gender, by intra-household patterns, by the composition of deprivations across all of the MPI indicators that they experience, etc. So these are the data sets that we're using, which are data sets in South Asia. So the first question is, of the eligible people, what percentage of them are poor? So I mentioned that across South Asia, 32 million school-aged children were MPI poor and not attending school. And that was basically 10% of all children. And for undernutrition, it was 45 million children were MPI poor and undernourished. And the question, of course, would be what proportion of children who are out of school, for example, are poor? So 37.5 million children are out of school in South Asia, and 32.3 million are poor. So that's 88%. So for each of the human capital deprivations, we can see to what extent it is a trigger of multidimensional poverty. And then we can look, as we did in Afghanistan, at the gender of children out of school, or the gender of people who are undernourished. So for example, across out of school children, 25% of boys were out of school in Afghanistan, not attending school, and 44% of boys. And the difference was statistically significant. But across all of the countries, in terms of undernutrition of children under 5 years of age, no difference across gender was statistically significant, which is a great leap forward from just a decade ago. We can also then look at patterns within the household. So for example, across South Asia, 11% of school-aged children lived in a poor household where one school-aged child does attend school and one school-aged child does not attend school. So in one out of 9 children are in that situation of inequality, and 14% for undernutrition. So we need to understand that, understand differentials in employment, in schooling, among adults, among children, of the human capital variables, and also their poverty status. We can also do complex indicators. So for example, in South Asia, 436 million people, 1 in 4, live in a household where no adult has completed 6 years of schooling. But of those, 135 million South Asians live in a household where a child aged 10 to 17 has completed 6 years of schooling. So these children are pioneers. They're the first generation to obtain human capital. And there are more pioneer children than out of school children in South Asia. Yet over a quarter of them are poor. So we can also look at human capital definitions that rely on mixed, different members of the household, the adults who are not educated and the children who are. And then we can look at the composition of poverty by indicator. And so we can understand between households with and without a pioneer child what deprivations beyond education do they experience. And that can be quite useful to understand the lived environment of human capital shortfalls. And then we can look at overlaps between any human capital indicators. This looks at overlaps between the 3 child-related indicators. But we also, for COVID analysis, looked at overlaps between other indicators. And so the techniques are elementary, but having that analysis alongside a multidimensional poverty measure can add a horizon of insights about other deprivations. And we can also look at multidimensional poverty with different cutoffs and to look at the intensity of poverty that people experience. So to conclude, I propose that as we focus on human capital and multidimensional poverty, that we further analyze the individual deprivations in health, education, and work that constitute human capital, that are included in most national MPIs, but that can be further analyzed to elucidate very important relationships about overlapping and clustered deprivations. We gave illustrations from South Asia, and we invite further research. There's a lot more to be done in this area with linked individual and household analyses across a suite of indicators. And we very much hope that together with colleagues in Indonesia, we will be able to push the field in this direction. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Alkire, and I think, and thank you for completing your speech actually in about the time that we have allocated. I encourage the audience actually to think about the burning question, but just put or write down your question in the Q&A box. We're going to read all the questions after the second speakers complete the presentation. So we heard by Professor Alkire that link the MPI to the human capital. The second speaker will talk perhaps more on the nexus between the poverty and inequality. And many of you already heard, already familiar about him. Dr. Asep Suryahadi, he's a former director of the SMERU Research Institute. And many of you, including me, I think, know him as among the few economists who consistently research the topics around the poverty measurement, the poverty situation in Indonesia. So before he direct SMERU from 2009-2019 for the 2 periods, he was the SMERU deputy director, and after completing the director position in 2019. He's still doing a lot of research related with the topic related with the poverty, and in addition to the research that he's doing, he's also served as the member Masyarakat Statistik with the advisory board of the Badan Pusat Statistik, the National Statistical Agency. He's also a member of the editorial board of the Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies, BS, and the advisory board of the Indonesian National University. So Dr. Suryahadi will present the topic income, inequality, and population era. So I think without further ado, I give the 20 minutes, the next 20 minutes for Dr. Suryahadi to present the topic.
So the title of my talk today is about income, inequality, and poverty convergence of districts in Indonesia during decentralization era, which is based on a paper that I wrote together with Priyasto Aji and Iqbal Wibisono. As a background, I'm sure you are all familiar with the situation in Indonesia after decentralization until before COVID in 2019. Yeah, we have a steady economic growth around 5% per year, and we have continuous poverty reductions from around 18% to become half of it by 2019. But inequality, vertical inequality, which is inequality among people, has increased. And this has led a question whether regional inequality has also increased. If we look at the literature, there are actually two opposing views on the relationship between decentralization and regional inequality. One side argue that decentralization could increase regional inequality because mainly of the weakening of the equalization role of the central government. But the opposite side argues that decentralization could decrease regional inequality mainly through increase in allocative efficiency and informational advantage that owned by the subnational governments. So based on this, we formulate our research question. We would like to examine whether decentralization has led to a convergence or divergence in three indicators: income per capita, inequality, and poverty across districts in Indonesia. So what we mean by convergence, this concept refers to a process in which poor regions grow faster than rich regions and therefore catch up on them. And this concept is directly related to the neoclassical neoclassical growth theory, especially its assumption that capital in particular is subject to diminishing return. There are two types of convergence. One is unconditional convergence, where all economies will converge toward the same steady state in the long run in terms of the GDP per capita and also its growth rate. But there is also conditional convergence, where convergence will still occur, but will take place at different long-run levels. Yeah. What this means that because GDP per capita depends on factor endowments and institutions, which can vary from one economy to the other, even in the long run, the long-run steady state will not be exactly the same across regions. In the literature, there is a huge literature on convergence, but what I would like to highlight here is the first point that actually the neoclassical growth theory implies that regions will evolve not only towards the same level mean of income per capita, but it also its income distribution. Therefore, convergence will occur also not only in terms of income per capita, but also in terms of inequality and also in terms of poverty. That's why we chose the three outcome indicators. In terms of the estimation method, most of the empirical evidence use either cross-section regressions or panel data fixed effect estimations. And studies based on the fixed effect estimation usually find much higher conversion rates. And the more recent studies has also included spatial dimension into the analysis because people now realize that a region nearing to each other will have some kind of space correlation. This is the model that standard in the convergence analysis, which basically says that the dependent variable is the growth rate of an outcome indicator, in this case, income per capita, inequality, and poverty, while the main independent variable is the lag of the level of the indicators. And the coefficients of this main independent variable is the convergence rate. So following the recent literature, we will take into account regional interactions in our estimation, and hence we will use two spatial econometric model, which is the spatial autoregressive model and the spatial error model. The data we use is mostly from BPS. Yeah, we use GDP per capita for income. We use Gini ratio for inequality, and we use poverty rate. And to test for conditional convergence, we include some covariates such as school enrollment rate, share of labor in various sectors, and literacy and literacy rates from the Indodapur database. So we see that the covariates are mostly human capital variable. We use data for the time period from 2002 to 2019. Yeah. And also, because there are many district division in Indonesia during this period, we use the original border in 2001 to create a balanced panel data. So we have 256 districts in the analysis. This is the summary statistics of our data. We see, for example, that the GDP per capita in terms of 2001 rupiah has increased from about 6 million rupiah per person per year in 2002 to about 13 million per person in 2019. So income per capita has increased, and if we compare urban and rural area, we see that the rate of increase, which is nationally about 4.6% per year, is higher in urban area compared to rural area. If we compare Java and outside Java, it's higher in Java than outside Java. Inequality measure in Gini ratio, we see that the average Gini ratio across district in 2002 is 0.26. It has increased to 0.33 by 2019. And if we compare urban and rural area, actually the increase in inequality is higher in rural area than in urban area, and also higher outside Java than in Java. For poverty, the mean poverty rate across districts in 2002 is 18%. It has been halved to 9.6% by 2019. And if we compare the rate of reduction, it's actually higher in rural area than in urban area, and higher in Java than outside Java. So now we go into the main analysis. This is the plot of income per capita level in 2002 in the horizontal axis, and its growth between 2002 and 2009 in the vertical axis. So each dot represent one district. What we see from this plot is that most districts have increased their income per capita as they have positive growth rate over the period. And the growth in income per capita is higher at district with lower initial income per capita, as shown by the negatively sloped of the fitted values. Yeah. So this indicates that has been a convergence in terms of income per capita. And when we estimate this using the model, this is confirmed. We see that in this result, we compare the result from spatial error autocorrelation model, the SAM model, with the spatial autoregressive model, the SAR model, with and without control variable to find out whether the convergence has been unconditional or conditional. The first one, we confirm that there is a convergence across districts in terms of income per capita, shown by the negative coefficients here. And since the covariates have some significant coefficients, it implies that the convergence is conditional. So we have conditional convergence in terms of income per capita, and also the spatial parameters coefficients are significant, justifying our use of spatial correlation model. If we compare across urban and rural area, we also see that there is a conditional convergence. but the convergence rate is higher in the rural districts. If we compare the magnitude of the coefficient for rural district is much higher than in urban district. And we compare across district in Java and outside Java. We also have conditional convergence, but the rate of convergence is faster in districts outside Java compared to district in Java. Now we move on to inequality. The same analysis, each dot represent one district. We see that most districts have experienced an increase in inequality during the period, so confirming that there has been an increase in vertical inequality in Indonesia during this period, shown by the positive growth rate. Most of the dots are above the horizontal axis. And the inequality growth is higher at the district with lower initial inequality, indicated by the negatively sloped fitted line. So this also indicates convergence in inequality across district, which is again confirmed by the estimation result shown by the negative coefficient for all the estimation. And since again the sum of the covariates are significant, it indicates that this is a conditional convergence. And again, the spatial parameters are significant. And if we compare across urban and rural district, we also have conditional convergence, which interestingly, they have similar convergence rates between urban and rural district. And similarly, also for district in Java and outside Java, they have similar rates of convergence in inequality. Now finally move to poverty. This is also similar. Each dot represent one district. First of all, we see that most districts have experienced a reduction in poverty rate during the period. We see that most of the dots are below the horizontal axis. They have negative growth rate of poverty rate during this period. And the reduction in poverty is higher at district with higher initial poverty rate, again indicated by the negatively sloped fitted line. Again, this indicates convergence in poverty rate across district, which is again confirmed by the estimation result shown by the negative coefficients of the main independent variable. And again, the covariates, some of the covariates are statistically significant, again indicating conditional convergence, and also the use of spatial model is justified by the significant spatial parameters. And if we compare across urban and rural district, we see that also there is a conditional convergence in both urban district and rural district, and the rate of convergence is faster actually in urban districts, shown by the much larger magnitude of the coefficient for urban districts. And if we compare across district in Java and outside Java, again we have conditional convergence in both areas, but it is faster in districts outside Java, shown by the larger coefficient in outside Java. So that's the main analysis. And to conclude, first, that we see that since decentralization, Indonesia has achieved a significant progress in improving people welfare, as shown by the increasing per capita income and reduction in poverty. But vertical inequality across people has increased. But our analysis shown that actually there has been a conditional convergence in terms of income per capita, inequality, and poverty rate across district. Which, in other words, there has been a reduction in regional inequality across districts in Indonesia. The meaning of this conditional convergence means that the levels of income per capita, inequality, and poverty across districts will converge over time, but the gaps will not be completely eliminated because of the differences in districts' endowment factors. And this convergence, this conditional convergence occurs both among urban and rural districts, as well as across districts in Java and outside Java, but we have seen that the speed of convergence are different across areas. The implications of our findings, the most important one is that since decentralization have produced desirable results in terms of regional inequality, we should maintain decentralization policy and resist efforts to recentralize. But if we want to have a higher convergence rate, a faster convergence rate, we need special efforts to assist districts with low income per capita, high inequality, and high poverty rates to improve their endowment factors and also their institutions. So I think that's the end of my sharing of this study. This paper will be published forthcoming in the Journal of Southeast Asian Economy in the December editions of this year. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Suryahadi, for sharing the very interesting research, and congratulations for the forthcoming publication of this paper. We have only about 10 minutes for Q&A, and I think we have more than enough people that already write down their questions. So let me quickly read from the Q&A box the question for both Professor Alkire and then Dr. Suryahadi. So first question from Darendra Wardana. To my knowledge, there have been criticism on MPI that with composite index, it might gloss over the problems at particular issue. Therefore, it might be difficult to formulate specific policy to tackle the most crucial problem. So I would like to hear more from you on that observation. Thank you. Second question from Pak Sony Priarsono. Pak Asep, what are the factors that are responsible for convergence of urban-rural poverty across districts in Indonesia? Third question from Pak Bangkit. Dear Pak Asep, thank you very much for your presentation. Did you see or control the impact of local election on poverty and inequality convergence? Second question, what is the role of the recently increasing village fund on poverty reduction in the rural area? Fourth question from Pak Yogi to Pak Asep, given the fixed effect has represented the individual effect, it allows the region to have different steady state and no longer follow absolute convergence hypothesis. Isn't it necessary to show the coefficient from the OLS, the one from the graph, to show whether the absolute convergence do exist, and compare the coefficient between absolute and conditional convergence? I think there's two more. So I think one from Mas Budi to Professor Alkire. So thank you for the good presentation, Professor Alkire. In developing countries, thank you for the very, very clear presentation, Professor Alkire. My question is related about correlation among indicators within the MPI. If exclusivity is not required, is there any level of correlation that we should avoid? If the correlation is too high, will that situation create redundant policy alleviation policies? Again, thank you for the presentation. And last question from Albert to Professor Alkire. In developing countries that have limited budget to reduce poverty, does the government have difficulty in assessing the success of poverty alleviation program if they use the MPI? Thank you. So I think each of you have like 3 minutes, unfortunately, to respond to this question. So let me start, give the first turn to Professor Alkire.
Thank you so much to all of you for these exchanges, and I'm a great admirer of your own work. In terms of composite measures, that is a misunderstanding of the MPI, but it is an accurate criticism of composite indicators. Composite indicators take one number for each indicator and create a weighted aggregate, like the Human Development Index, the Social Progress Index, the Legatum Prosperity Index. In those aggregations, because the weights are what we call precision weights, and the numbers are aggregated across the population and come from different surveys, it's difficult for the reasons that Revalian, amongst others, has articulated, because the marginal rates of substitutability change, and we don't know exactly how to set them. They are fixed by the weights, but they vary in the presence of other dimensions and at different levels of attainment. So that is a complicated one. For the MPI, these are not precision weights, and they are not composite measures. They are what Tony Atkinson called counting-based measures. And so the form is linear, and you can break it down after identification precisely back to microdata information by household. And you can analyze it with appropriate sampling weights and treatments rigorously. And that's what I was alluding to in the presentation. So people do not understand that. And so sometimes they think that an MPI is like an HDI, but the mathematical structure is completely different. It is a counting-based measure with a poverty line and then a cutoff. And therefore it can be disaggregated because it's based on microdata and a matrix of microdata with columns of each of the indicators for each of the respondents. And that's not how a composite measure like HDI are built. In terms of the question from Professor Budi on correlation, we construct, we don't use correlation because correlation, or Kramer's V in the binary case, looks at all 4 cells of the crosstab. So it responds to the levels of deprivation and of non-deprivation. And so it's a bad indicator of association for our purposes. So we use a 1943 measure, which we've renamed the redundancy measure. And what it does is it looks at the percentage of the population who have both deprivations of a single pair divided by the minimum of the marginals, the minimum of the percentage of the population deprived in either of the 2 indicators that you are comparing. That is a ratio going from 0 to 1, and it shows what percentage of possible deprivations are actually fulfilled in terms of the matched pair. In practice, and we do that for all of the national MPIs, the results have to be interpreted carefully. High redundancy means duplication of information, but you need to look over time, because maybe people get electricity, but it might be 5 years before they stop using cooking fuel. So in one period, there is high association, but in a later period, the indicators might move differently across time. So we can't use it mechanically, but if there is high redundancy between an indicator pair, then retaining both has to be justified, or the weights might need to be lightened because it will be providing, at least in the current period, duplicate information. And the third question is about budgets. So as we know, the SDGs recommend breaking silos and having integrated multi-sectoral policies because these are more cost effective. So the MPI is used in most countries to guide budget allocation because it focuses on the poor and on the exact sectoral composition of poverty, and this varies across different subnational units of the country. So countries like Costa Rica, I don't have time to go into the details, have the most sophisticated evaluation where they found without increasing the budget, simply by reallocating using their MPI, they had an acceleration of poverty reduction. So I would commend their case to you. But it's a very good question and one on which OP ourselves are doing some work right now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Alkire. So over to you, Kang Asep. 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. The first question from Pak Sony. According to the theory, decentralization will lead to reduction in regional inequality because with decentralization, the regional governments have informational advantage because they know their regions, their people better than the central government, so they can allocate resources more efficiently and hence resulting in a better outcome. But we did not test this in our study. We just examine whether there has been a convergence or divergence across districts. For Pak Darendra and Pak Bangkit, the answer to all the questions is no. We have not yet we have not yet done any heterogeneity analysis taking into account political budget cycles, natural disaster, local elections, and also the village fund. I think that will be an interesting extension to do more heterogeneity analysis in this aspect. Yeah, but we haven't done it. For Pak Yogi, so actually, maybe I was too fast. In each of the estimation result, we have 4 estimation. The first 2 are examining the unconditional convergence, but taking into account the spatial correlation. So we see that for both unconditional and conditional convergence, we have significant results. But since the covariates are significant also, it says that what happened is actually conditional convergence. If none of the covariates is significant, then we will say that it is unconditional convergence, and we can use the results from estimation without control variable. I think that's my 3 minutes, Elan. Thank you.
Well, thank you both Professor Alkire and Dr. Suryahadi. I'm not going to summarize the many important points actually from the 2 speakers. I think it's not fair just to summarize actually what they've been saying this last 40 minutes, 45 minutes, just in the like 1 minute. So I'll let you access actually the papers, the references that are accessible actually in the site, where you can read further the works of Professor Alkire, as well as the paper, the forthcoming paper that will be published actually in Journal of the South Asian Economy, explaining about what Dr. Asep, Suryahadi, and then the colleagues did for their paper. I think before closing, I'd like to ask all the audience to give a big applause for the 2 speakers. And with that, I close the session, this plenary session 2. And again, thank you for Professor Alkire and then also Dr. Suryahadi for giving time and giving your very bright minds to share with us here. With that, I close the session. Thank you very much, and see you next time.